Hey, Russell here from Adelaide Physio and Pilates. I've given myself a task for this video today. I'm going to try and convince you about bioplasticity, and more specifically, I'm going to try and convince you that cartilage is a very changeable thing, much more changeable than you're probably led to believe. So to start off with, what is bioplasticity? Well, the easiest way to explain it is if you go to the gym and you do some strengthening work, you make, let's say for example, you're working on your guns and you do some curls with a weight in your hand, you expect that muscle will get stronger. And it does, and that's because you're giving it a stimulus to change. You're picking up something that's challenging the muscle and the muscle responds. That's plasticity, that's change. And plasticity happens in all the systems of the body. It's a thing that we're blessed with, and it operates from the moment that you're born and before that, right up until when you take your last breath. Plasticity, changeability is something that we have all through life, and that's really important to remember. It's not just something that you have for a period of time and then it stops when you hit middle age or something like that. It operates all through life. So you might have even heard the term neuroplasticity, which is where you make brain changes. You might have heard of terms like brain training and things like that. It's all operating on the thought of neuroplasticity and this idea that your brain has got the ability to change all through your life as well. So whereas there was a time where it was thought that after a certain age the brain didn't change at all, we now know that's completely rubbish, and it's got the ability to change, adapt, to learn, to upregulate, downregulate, moment to moment and day to day. So brain's very changeable. That's neuroplasticity, and that's how people recover from stroke. It's how people learn. It's how you learn a new language. It's how you learn to change your behavior. It's how you learn new concepts. That's neuroplasticity. We kind of accept that change is something that you can make muscles change. Muscles get stronger if they're given a stimulus to change, and they get weaker if they're not given a stimulus to maintain strength. Bone changes too. Bone can lose bone mineral density. It can gain bone mineral density if you do the right kind of exercises and give it the right kind of loads. Your brain changes, balance changes, your immune system changes, which is why you have vaccinations. Why is it then that there's such a difficulty with the idea that cartilage changes too? And the prevailing thought is that cartilage is something that gets thinner over time and becomes damaged over time and gets worse over time, and there's just a one-way trip towards a knee replacement or a hip replacement. It's kind of the prevailing thought that's out there. Once you have osteoarthritis, then that's kind of it, and the joint surface cartilage is only going to change in one direction. Why is it that we have been led to think that? Because, as I'm going to try and show you, cartilage is a very changeable thing, and perhaps what sets it apart from muscle, which is very vascular, and so it's got the ability to adapt and change more quickly, cartilage isn't, and it gets its nutrition from in a different way. It gets it through compression and then the compression coming off it, so the nutrition is squeezed into it rather than having a blood supply. And as a result of that, that's one of the reasons why cartilage is a slower adapter, but it still adapts. So I've got two studies to talk about, and hopefully this will present both sides of that equation. So the first one that I want to talk about is one where they took a bunch of rats, mice or rats, one of the two. They took a bunch of rodents. Actually, they didn't specify, and took them to the International Space Station. And then there was a number of them that they didn't take them into space, but they unloaded their leg for a period of time, and to see what happened to their joints, and see what happened to the joint cartilage, and see what happened to the meniscus inside the joint as well. And the results were really, really interesting. And even before we get to the results, I think some of the discussion beforehand is worth talking about too, because it helps to demonstrate this plasticity, this bioplasticity that exists in our bodies, but happens in the cartilage too. So one of the things in the discussion beforehand said, reduced weight-bearing studies have demonstrated deterioration of articular cartilage occurs similarly to excessive loading, resulting in cartilage degradation. So what it's saying there is, if you load something too little, or if you load it too much, then it can have a consequence on the tissue structure, in this case cartilage. Even partial loading, as in taking some of the load off the cartilage instead of full loading, leads to substantial cartilage loss, with 6 to 8% of cartilage thinning occurring after less than 2 months. That's pretty quick. That's quite a reasonable change. And then even quicker than that, short periods of hind limb unloading, so taking weight off, I don't even want to know how they do it, hind limb unloading, 13 days in rats increases pro-arthritic biomarkers in knee cartilage. So they're starting to see some of the chemical changes in the cartilage that's involved in osteoarthritis. That's really interesting. So unloading the joint, not giving it enough stimulus, not giving it enough compression, not using it enough, is enough to increase the rate of some of these biomarkers, the markers of chemicals in the cartilage that are a signal of arthritis. Wow, that's really interesting. And I thought this statement was really good too. In general, short and long-term periods of reduced weight bearing alter the metabolism of the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, and cartilage health, and is disadvantageous to joint health. So short and long terms of reduced weight bearing. Now, you think about it in terms of the person that has knee pain. Let's pick knee pain. What it's reasonable to automatically do, because your knee hurts, is to start doing less. And that's just an instinctive thing, I suppose. But if that's reinforced by a healthcare professional saying, well, looks like you got osteoarthritis in your knee, you better not load it too much, you better not do too much, you better not do too much because you might wear it out quicker, or one of those kind of messages that is really blatantly incorrect, then you can see then how that can actually feed into the degradation of the cartilage, of losing volume of the cartilage, of affecting the cartilage health. And I think that is a really important point to take from this. And we haven't even started talking about the study yet. This is just a discussion. And the other thing I thought that was a really interesting phrase was, reduced weight bearing both prescribed and due to a sedentary lifestyle without physical activity has also been associated with cartilage degradation. So reduced weight bearing that's both prescribed, as in a healthcare professional, probably with the best of intentions, mind you, saying, well, you better rest that up, but also a sedentary lifestyle. And not much more needs to be said about that. Reduced loading as a result of lifestyle, just not doing as much, or the work environment, or resting a knee because it hurts. All right. So what were the results of this study? They took these rodents into space, and what they found was that the cartilage degradation, both after being in the International Space Station and after having the hind limb unloaded. So with the hind limb unloading, it was restricted in its movement, whereas in the space station they could still move, they just didn't have the gravity acting on them. Occurred at similar places, and there was a meniscal volume decline, so the thickness of the meniscus got less from using the joint less, from having the same load associated with gravity and using it. And the content of the good stuff in the cartilage, the glycosaminoglycan GAG content was decreased, and more of the enzymes that are to do with the destruction's a harsh word, but the destruction of the cartilage were increased as well. The bottom line was that, yep, that fit with what they were expecting, that there would be a reduction in cartilage health, there'd be a reduction in cartilage thickness and meniscal thickness as well. But what do you think happened then when they came back down to earth and they start moving again and they have gravity acting on their joints again? And interestingly enough, they recover after a certain amount of time back on full gravity, exercising, moving. It's hard to find a better example of the plasticity of cartilage, of the importance of load, and the importance of, walking, being upright, moving, on the health of cartilage that you've got, and also showing that it can adapt in a positive way. It can improve when it's given stimulus to do so. So that was the first study, and I think that was really interesting to me. There were a lot of things in that. It's quite involved. There's a lot of histology in this study that I didn't understand and I don't even want to get into, but the bottom line was, the big takeaway is that it's actually really, really important to weight bear, and cartilage relies on it. And more than that, cartilage changes. That's the important thing I want you to get. Cartilage changes. Now, so the other end of the spectrum is, so what happens if you do something more? So instead of going to space, what about if you exercise more? This study was a really good illustration of that. So this was looking at marathon runners, people that had never run a marathon before, and they recruited them because they won the ballot to go into the London Marathon, and they took MRIs of their knees beforehand and MRIs of their knees afterwards, so that they could see what the difference was. And they particularly were looking for people that didn't have any pain, so asymptomatic individuals, no pain, and MRI'd them before and MRI'd them after doing all the training and then doing the marathon, and to see what happened, to see what changed, to see what was better, what was worse in terms of the MRI results. And it was really interesting. Once again, it's a really good illustration of how imaging isn't the be all and end all. So like I said, they were people that didn't have any pain at all, and they ended up using 82 volunteers, so they MRI'd both of the knees, and what they found was that there were fairly high rates of changes in the knees even before they started the training for their marathon. So let's take meniscus, for example. Now, if you knew you had a meniscal tear, chances are you wouldn't start training for a marathon. If you knew you had a meniscal tear and you went and saw your physio or your doctor, they'd say, oh, I don't think you should be training for a 42k run. And yet when they MRI'd the knees of these people that were training for the London Marathon, 36% of them, 36% of the knees, more than a third of the knees, had meniscal tears. no pain, but they had meniscal tears. And another 16% had meniscal signal hyperintensity. So we're looking at more than half of the people that went ahead to do the marathon, and these were people that finished, had meniscal changes like that, either a tear or a signal hyperintensity. Really interesting, but no pain, remember? And then afterwards, so they ran the marathon, and afterwards there were no differences, or one individual, one person had a change in the imaging of their meniscal lesion. How cool is that? So more than half of them had something going on, and all of them, except for one, got through it without any change in the status on imaging of their meniscal tear. So it really makes you start to think a little bit differently about imaging, in my eyes. And we know that there's a fairly poor correlation between imaging findings and pain. This is a great illustration of that. There's a poor correlation between imaging findings, more than half of the people having something found that was going on with their meniscus, but had no pain. So that was the first thing. As far as cartilage, articular cartilage, so joint surface cartilage goes, more than half of the knees of those that went on to finish the marathon already had cartilage damage, in inverted commas. 65% of them actually, and all were asymptomatic once again. And I think that is one of the really pertinent things that, it's a problem with imaging, and we see it every day, that people go and have something done, whether it's for their back, for their shoulder, for their knee, for the hip, whatever, and come back with a report that says in black and white, this person has got subacromial bursal thickening. And that may or may not be associated with pain, it may not be the primary cause of their problem, but once you've read it, once it's in black and white, it's on the page, it really means something, and it's really hard to forget and unsee, and it's going to change. Talking about neuroplasticity, it's going to change your perception of your body part. It's going to change the way that you think about how it should be able to move, what you should do, all of those things. The way that you see your body is changed forever, whether or not the imaging result is relevant or not. On a similar theme, before the marathon, 42% of knees had ligamentous lesions, and the vast majority were found in the anterior cruciate ligament, 90% of them. So 40% of these people that had, once again, no pain, had ligament lesions. And so the result of running the marathon would be, and the popular thought would be, well, training for a marathon and running for your first marathon and running it is probably going to be detrimental in some way to the cartilage. Not going to help it. The main weight-bearing bits of the knee beforehand had signs of bone marrow edema, swelling in the bone underneath, just adjacent to the joint, just underneath the cartilage, and it showed complete reversibility during the training and running of the marathon. So the joint health got better, not worse, from running, being put through those kind of loads. What a great example of bioplasticity right there. The bone, the joint adapted to going out there and doing that training. Didn't get worse, it got better. And as I talked about before, it didn't cause a progression of meniscal tears, and importantly, the presence of the meniscal tears didn't affect their performance, and the presence of osteoarthritic changes didn't affect anyone's performance. It still allowed people to run the marathon and complete it. So we've seen both ends of the spectrum there. We've seen We've seen the effects of less load, and we've seen the effects of more load. And it's important to say too, when you're talking about the more load, there is a point where if you load excessively, then you would expect that the changes wouldn't be favourable, that you would have you'd have an effect on the joint health. But you can load it. So this idea of the sweet zone is really nice. There's a zone there. It's a zone where if you do a little bit, if you do too little, you're not going to change. And in fact, with these guys that went into space, their cartilage health went down. But also in people where you load excessively, then that's not really where you want to be either. There's a point where your physiology just can't keep up with the excessive load you're putting on it. But if you're training in that middle zone, in the sweet zone, and you're giving the joint some load, your body responds, it changes. Cartilage can change. We know that it can change. And yet there's this idea out there that if you load your knee, your hip, whatever, too much by, for example, doing exercise or walking or running, that you can actually make it worse or increase arthritis. And it's really important that we move beyond that. I hope I've been able to convince you this idea of bioplasticity and the ability of cartilage to change. And this is exactly why when we take people through a program like the GLAD program or some other kind of graded exercise loading program, things improve. And it does depend on getting the starting point right, the baseline right, particularly when there's pain present. Say these marathon runners were asymptomatic, but if you already have joint pain, then finding out your starting point is critical, and then building on it from there and staying in that sweet zone, giving the joint enough load to adapt and change. And we've seen the changes that happen. We've seen the people that have come in here and gone through the process and have found that after a period of time they're moving better, their confidence gets better, their pain improves, their stiffness improves. We've seen it with our own eyes, people have experienced it. But the trick is to get that baseline right and then to progress it at the right kind of pace. Because if you don't progress it, then your body doesn't adapt. And that's really the aim of the game. Good. I hope that makes sense. If you've got any comments, if you want to ask any questions, if you want to talk about osteoarthritis with us, if you want to talk about the GLAD program and whether it would be suitable for you, by all means give us a call or send us a message, leave a comment, and we'd be very happy to have a chat with you about anything about this. Cheers. Hey, thanks for watching our video. If you liked it, we would love it if you would hit the thumbs up button below. It lets YouTube know that we know what we're talking about and that we're helping people. If you like the style of our videos and you'd like to see more of them and know when a new one is published, then just hit the subscribe button. And if you've got any thoughts or comments or questions, please add them below, because we answer all of them, and we love to hear comments because it helps us to shape the channel and find out what people want to know. It helps it to become as relevant as possible for everyone. So thank you.